we're going to buy that. And I think what was really interesting that I learned from this experience is even when you decide to buy for complex enough systems, you're actually also choosing to build at the same time. You're building sort of an impedance matching layer in your stack that is deeply coupled to an outside vendor that then they have unlimited control over what you have to do. It's really interesting.
Hey, and welcome to this episode of Build versus Buy, a 30-minute conversation with product and engineering leaders about situations during their career where they've had to decide whether to build or buy. If you'd like to be a guest, reach out to me at Mang-Git@useanvil.com. That's MANGGIT@useanvil.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating/review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Build vs. Buy podcast. I'm your host, Mang-Git, co-founder and CEO of Anvil, the fastest way to build software for documents. And today, as my guest, I have Matt Robben. He is a good friend from my time back in Dropbox. We've stayed very close, and also a very talented engineer and engineering manager. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you, Mang-Git. I wore this shirt just for you today. It's my 2014 Dropbox swag collection Gang of Tinkers tee. Had to dig it out of the archives, but
I'm just going to put it out there. You were not fresh out of college in 2014.
No, I was long out of college. I'd already done a tour of duty at Microsoft, followed by my first startup, which was acquired into Dropbox. So yeah, not a new grad back then. I'm an older man.
Well, thank you, Matt, for humoring me. But yeah, I would love to hear quickly just your background, how you got to where you are, your engineering background, for definitely as like leaders at some fairly well-known companies. And then we'll get into the meat of the conversation for today.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, I graduated with an ECE degree, so I'm a computer engineer background. My first tour of duty was at Microsoft working on the Windows kernel, where we built Windows 7 and Server 2008. We shifted and worked on the Surface Pro. So I got to use a lot of my engineering experience to try and build actual computers.
Wait, did you have AI to ask questions on how to build these things back then?
No, we didn't. My graduate project that I had to do for my honors thesis was to actually put together a VLSI layout of a working processor from circuitry, like all the way up. You started with a transistor, you built the blocks, you went all the way. And there was no automation to help you. It was Mentor graphics with terrible click through everything. It took the better part of a month in a lab to do that. So
how many prompts did you try?
Oh man. Too many late nights sleeping in the lab for that one. So yeah, fast forward, right? I mean, that was all the way back in 2011, 2012 after I left there. I shifted from corporate engineering and corporate life into startups and really haven't looked back. So initially did a very small startup out of Boston with one of my good friends, Matt Blackshaw, who brought me in at a company called Sold. That company was acqui-hired, as I mentioned, into Dropbox. From there, I went to One Medical. And from One Medical to a company called TruePic, where I worked on computer vision. And now at Serif Health, we are actually a company that focuses on healthcare price transparency. So we're a big data engineering firm working with petabytes of data and enormous monthly ETL jobs and things, largely around healthcare economics and where the money is going in our healthcare system. So that's a really cool sort of, all kinds of different spectra of areas that I've worked. I have generally taken the sort of like tech lead or TLM style of role. In a couple of situations like at Dropbox and One Medical, I was more on the management side and tended to lead full teams or like even groups. And at TruePic, I was the VP of engineering and now I'm the CTO. So, in any organization, I think I've generally taken a hands-on engineering leader role because I'm very curious. I like to know how things work. I still like to build. And I like to build software more than I necessarily like to build organizations. So I think from a passion perspective, that's how my career has gravitated. And I'm very much a 0 to 1 guy. I love the new, let's figure out how to make something work. Let's figure out how to get traction. Always passionate about that. I tend to get a little burnt out when my day is a lot more meetings and politics than it is actually working with technology. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would just one quick commentary on that. I feel like being a engineering leader at a larger organization like Dropbox or One Medical, is a very different role than being a VP of engineering at a TruePic or a CTO, right? Like
Absolutely.
you're not doing the building at those larger companies. You're building people, which,
Yep.
I will say, as somebody who has worked closely with you, you are excellent at doing, even if you don't like doing it, you are excellent at building people and building up really talented engineers. But I will say it is a very different role. It is a very different role than hands-on coding.
I appreciate that. And, having managed at this point hundreds of people throughout my managerial career, I do think I did my best. I'm a deeply human person. I have a lot of empathy and EQ, and I'm always trying to find ways to help people grow in their own careers and meet them where they are more than treat them like pawns on a chessboard, right? So I think that's the MO. That's an easy way to be called a good manager. The harder part of all of it is setting priorities and seeing alignment with folks where you're asking them to do things that maybe they don't want to do, right? Grunge work, working on skills that they're not good at because they need to be well-rounded, and yet, they deeply don't like doing those kinds of growth activities. So that's the harder thing. I'm definitely not the best like whip cracker, strict manager there. So, I'm also aware of my own faults, and that's where I think in bigger organizations, sometimes you've got to have a pretty hardline approach about these are the priorities, you're the folks that need to get the job done. And if we don't hit the targets, like you're accountable to that. Driving accountability and strategy is more that big org thing. And also as I see it, and I know I took the cynical route at first, when those disagree with other people at that level, a lot of what you're fighting then is organizational bureaucracy and priorities through hierarchy. And again, that's where I feel like fun goes to die. So as little of that as I have to do, that's where I'm happy.
At that point, you're managing your circle of influence and how it's not really.
Yeah, you're not building anybody, right? And your peer
Right.
doesn't care about you, and it's very utilitarian and transactional, and that's not fun for me. So,
Yeah. Totally understand and totally feel you. Well, with that, maybe we can dive into the meat of today's conversation, which is always build versus buy, as the podcast title suggests. And you having been at organizations of all sizes and been in leadership roles, probably have quite a few good stories here, but maybe you can pick one to just share with the audience.
yeah, a ton to pick from. It's the Surface Pro chipset, Dropbox's Dev VM, a lot there. I think the most interesting, maybe for your audience, that I indexed on before the call is the decision of One Medical to build their own in-house EHR. And some of the challenges that created for the organization that I was directly brought in to solve. Because, when you think about this concept of build versus buy, I'm a builder at heart. And yet there are some times where when you choose build, you don't realize the cost you're going to incur for yourself in the future and the taxes that's going to place on your organization and people in the future. And I think One Medical, they made a build decision very early on to build their own in-house EHR that they thought would give them a competitive advantage and some differentiation as a primary care practice.
Yeah. And before we get deeper into this, can we just quickly define EHR for our audience?
Yeah, sorry. Electronic health record system. So when you go into your doctor's office and you see your doctor stare at a computer screen, click 5,000 times, type a bunch of gobbledygook into some boxes, and then they usually hit the print button and something pops out with a prescription, your referral, and what to do next, your sort of take-home care guide. A lot of that is from an EHR called Epic. That's the sort of usual suspect in most practices these days, especially big health systems. They're beastly complex pieces of software. Everything in clinical medicine and everything that you can do as part of a visit, as well as all of the billing, coding, appointment management, referrals management, records management, and push-pull. All of that is done under this umbrella term of EHR, Electronic Health Record System. So,
got it. So it's in a lot of ways for maybe our audience here, it's like Salesforce for medicine or Oracle for medicine, but maybe even more specialized and
100%.
Weird because there's all these extra regulation that has to happen.
Exactly. It is deeply regulated because, for example, if a doctor decided to go through Epic and prescribe you fentanyl, oxycodone, right? The idea that there's someone out there watching your prescription history and making sure you're not a pill mill, right? You're not pushing controlled substances on people that shouldn't get them. There's business logic rules that the organization wants to run to make sure that doesn't happen. That's all in the EHR. There's also organizations, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency of the United States, that wants to look at the EHR records and make sure that you're not violating any federal laws around that. So all of that to say, there's also clinical standards of care. There's insurance company standards of care on what they will allow. That is all linked to what your insurance card says. There's so much complexity in any given healthcare transaction. The EHR has essentially become this operating system of healthcare to know amongst all those different inputs and rules, are you doing this correctly, right? So it's this sort of like gut check on the doctor, and it's also a data entry system for the doctor. And unfortunately, I think if you talk to any physician today, they'll probably tell you it's also where their version of fun comes to die, because you're maintaining and clicking through software as opposed to having a relationship with the patient and trying to get them healthy, right? You're keeping the machine healthy, not the person healthy. And so if I hear any feedback from the industry at large, it's usually they hate EHRs. They hate that they have to work with them. They hate that, they've moved off of paper and conversation into these structured systems. But having built that structured system for a large practice, I think a lot of folks, especially in the regulatory side, see it as essential complexity in healthcare today.
Yeah. And large practice being One Medical, which, as many of you may know, was purchased by Amazon a while back and runs lots and lots of offices across multiple cities in America. Are they outside of America? Do you know that?
I don't believe so. It's been a while since I've checked on what Amazon Health has sort of done with the business and where they've taken it. But no, when I was there, we were in, I believe, 8 states when I got there. And when I left, we were in many more than that. But, largely urban metropolitan area. And they migrated a little bit during the time I was there from being seen as like just pure concierge medicine. Anybody can walk in and get an appointment, to a little bit more of a bundled add-on for employers and a perk for an employer, where they might run an on-site location at Apple's Cupertino office, or they might run an on-site location at Boeing's, flight engineering center or something like that. So
cool. Well, so with the backdrop of all of that complexity, take us back to that decision where, it sounds like by the time you were there, they had already made the decision to create that EHR, but
so they chose build, right? And so let me set the table for you here. They chose build probably back in 2011 or 2012 or 2013, when the practice very early days had first gotten started. And they chose build for a couple of reasons. Number one, the assumption was that technology will speed you up, right? In the days when like paper was common and there wasn't a lot of organization, and the requirements around all this annotation and note-taking were pretty light. This is the same thing as bringing in a co-pilot today for an engineer. Like it sort of just made sense. We should invest in the HR. We should make people move faster with technology and let the system get out of their way so they can do what they love and let them practice medicine. Of course, the second that you build any kind of, or you make any buy decision like this, it's, well, then how are we going to send medical records out? Well, I guess we got to build a fax module to that EHR in case we need to send it out. How are we going to let people navigate to their nearest pharmacy when they're in the room, right? When the doctor's discussing, okay, I think you need amoxicillin, where do you want to go? Well, patients don't always know the name, the address, like the location of the nearest pharmacy to them. That can be complicated. So then, well, let's build a pharmacies module, right? And so eventually when I got there, they had pretty much every function that was going on in the office: orders. They were working on prescriptions. They hadn't finished that one yet. They had referrals. They had record push-pull. They had faxes. They had appointment booking and management. And all of this was linked to a mobile app that the patient could see, so that you could track your medical record and navigate any encounter and any subsequent thing with your doctor, right? That was the platform that I inherited. And I got brought in on the prescription side, specifically because when they chose to build this platform, there was no regulatory requirement around using it for electronic prescribing, but then regulations changed, and it was dictated down to all healthcare practitioners that by, I believe it was 2019, everybody had to be using electronic prescribing systems. You had to. That was forced requirement. And I believe a lot of this was sort of a side effect of what was going on with the opioid epidemic, right? And again, this just makes sense. If it's centralized, if it's electronic data, we can see where these prescriptions are coming from, as opposed to tracking sheets that came off pads of paper that maybe somebody stole from somewhere. So that the intuition was wise, I think, that centralizing it makes sense. But now One Medical, which doesn't have a prescribing module because they're very complicated to build, has to build it. And so that build versus buy decision was made for me, but we had individual components of it that we had to select. Do you build or buy each one of these little subthreads? So data for what prescriptions are even available. Do we want to try and cobble that together ourselves? Do we want to build an ETL pipeline? Do we want to try and compose how prescriptions actually get made in the real world? Or do we want to go buy that from First Data Bank, which is a data vendor that has like just a crosswalk table you can use? Do you want to go and integrate to every pharmacy in the country and build a Walgreens integration and then, a Kroger integration and so on and so on, all the integrations you could build? Or do you want to just integrate with SureScripts because they are essentially a prescription clearinghouse? So in order to check the box on e-prescribing, you actually had to make all these other build versus buy decisions.
Before you guys, just quickly though, like before, when you showed up, you didn't have the prescriptions module. Yep. Was it literally pen and paper before that?
Yes.
Okay, so it was not in the system. It might have been typed in that you're on this thing, but like
exactly,
the prescriptions were pen and paper.
You would click through, but in order to get that to a pharmacy, they could call it in. Yeah. They could fax a picture of the paper. Or they could give you the paper and say, walk down. And I mean, a wet signature, right? Like in ink was required back then. So everybody, they loved the pad of paper and a pen. And that was the sort of the expectation. So in order to turn on one of these systems, you have to go through integration with everybody I talked about. Then you also have to get it certified. You have to get it certified by the clearinghouse system, SureScripts, if you go that way. You'll have to get controlled substances certified by the federal government and the DEA. You have to prove that you're looking at it all. So this was a really complex web that we'd already had the build decision made for us on the overall EHR platform. And so the decision was, we've got to compose an answer by buying the things that speed us up that we don't get any kind of competitive advantage for. So data files on prescriptions that are out in the wild, we don't gain anything by collecting that. Same thing for like pharmacy registries. Do we need to go scrape this? Do we need to build a scraper for that? Is that valuable to us? No. However, the build was way too much to do the point integrations. Yeah. Setting up a fax integration to every pharmacy in the country one by one. Yeah, you get 80% of the market by doing 5 of them. We get it. But you are going to piss off a lot of people if you can't hit that other 20%. And that's the ultimate decision on, okay, we're going to go ahead with the SureScripts sort of platform integration. We're going to buy that. And I think what was really interesting that I learned from this experience is, even when you decide to buy, for complex enough systems, you're actually also choosing to build at the same time. You're building sort of an impedance matching layer in your stack that is deeply coupled to an outside vendor, that then they have unlimited control over what you have to do. It's right, like really interesting. And so it pushes a lot of work back on you, but it at least takes this fundamental, we don't really gain much by implementing this sort of interchange and 30 different access points to every fax line in the country. And thank goodness we didn't do that, because if we'd have said we were going to own that complexity, we would have done fax for half of them, because that's what a lot of people were still doing back then. And then very rapidly had to shift it to some sort of EDI or API as each point shifted. And so again, when we made the decision, we looked at that and said, is the technical ownership worth it? Is maintaining that at scale worth it? Does that give us any kind of strategic or competitive advantage? The answer was no. So integrate was definitely our best option there. And I think go ahead. Sorry.
Was there no e-prescribe system out there that you could have just integrated with that and they handled all of this for you?
Yeah.
Or was maybe your EHR system that complex already that you kind of needed to cobble it together?
No, you could think of this as a little bit of a decision of we wanted to cobble these pieces, but not these pieces, right? The way that all integrated together, like I'm sure we could have bought some sort of UI or UX module. The other fun thing was our hands were a little bit tied. We had a Rails and Angular full stack app that was the EHR. That actually is not the standard by which a lot of industry participants at the time were working in healthcare. When we integrated, I believe the formal interface for SureScripts was SOAP XML. So, that's an API from 25 years ago.
Right.
And I think any kind of UX or UI, this is the other thing about EHRs. As the owner of the EHR itself, we wanted a consistent user experience for the physicians at One Medical, right? We wanted to make them efficient. We wanted to train them on how our system worked. And we didn't want it to feel like a cobbled together Frankenstein of crap and like point fixes we brought in from this vendor to fix this one thing. So we actually built the UX on top of all of this that the physician would click through. And really that integration was just the record sending and XML inbound and outbound. So
I was going to say, a consistently bad experience is still a consistent experience, Matt.
It's true. That's very true. And I won't say that necessarily our experience was the best in the early days. I think our number one piece of feedback from folks was they never got upset about, can I access this pharmacy or that pharmacy, which is what drove the build buy decision. It was a lot more about, I don't like that this button is here. I don't like that I have to click this 3 times. I don't like how this presents itself in my, EHR record. And physicians are notoriously picky and opinionated people. They're very educated and smart. And I think that they, a lot of times, saw us as kind of like we're IT. We're just there, make the system work the way they wanted it to work and not engineers. But
your customers were the physicians.
Correct.
It wasn't, for your thing. Yeah.
And our customer was also executive leadership, because when a mandate like the electronic prescribing requirement comes down, think of it this way. If we don't hit the deadline, we don't prescribe medicine as a primary care practice at all. Because there was, in theory, no fallback to this. There was no wet paper, signatures anymore. So if we don't hit that deadline, how are we functional as a business, right? It was existential risk was how it was pitched to me when I joined the company. And it came with a deadline.
You're like, sign me up.
Yeah. So that was very stress inducing. It was a very hard year. And tons of credit. I definitely did some coding on that project. I was a lot more project manager than I was actually an engineer. And we had 12 engineers full-time working on this that had already been working on it off and on for the last couple of years. We managed to get it out the door in about 7 months, and then we got controlled substance on like 3 months later. So we hit all the timelines. It was a big success for the company, and especially with that existential sort of crisis that was hanging over our heads. But a lot of that's due to the great engineering team that worked on it all.
Well, how did other organizations deal with this? It feels, knowing how other healthcare systems work, both receive treatment at One Medical as well as at UCSF and all these other healthcare systems. They're not technology companies. So let's put it that way.
No, I think there was an upstream strategic decision as well. And this isn't like confidential information or anything like. I think One Medical also had this sort of dual pronged hope that if we built a good enough EHR platform, right? This is the operating system of a practice. Why not also then be able to adopt a licensure model and distribute the software, right? This operating system to another practice, because then they don't have to do the build versus buy. They would see all the effort that was invested, and it would be a no-brainer. You're just going to buy it, and you're going to buy it from a practice that does medicine this way and is provably efficient and successful at scale. Who's the alternative today, right? It's Epic, it's Cerner, it's these very big bloated EHR. There's a couple of smaller ones in the market, Dr. Chrono. There's a couple of newcomers that have built some things. I think Particle Health and some others are trying to do like some other models. But the EHR center sort of like operating system for a practice means it's a mission critical decision. It's made at the very earliest stages of company formation. And then you are married to it. You are never going to do or rarely going to pull off a single like swap and replace of that thing. So I think a lot of other folks just decide when they open, I'm going to go buy one of these platforms. I'm going to go buy one of these EHRs, and some of those might be very small market share, custom fit for a particular type of independent practice. Others are probably going to be these like extremely expensive, but enterprise grade, epics of the world. it all depends on what size practice are you, how does the budget of what they're going to ask you to pay for fit with what you're trying to accomplish. I think a lot of folks have tried the same model or at least aspired to build the EHR that works at scale for small practices. I don't hear of anybody with the kind of success and ubiquity of Epic, unfortunately.
So One Medical does not today, or has not sold its EHR system to other practices.
That is a different question that I'm not privy to. I left there a while ago. I'm not sure. I know, like, again, strategically, that was the point of investing and spending all this time doing it. And that actually is a great pivot to sort of Serif and the company I'm building today, right? We started the company thinking we were going to be an analytics sort of company that gathered or that used price transparency data, pardon me, to answer questions for our customers and also solve some sort of business problem for them as probably like a SaaS software play in the earliest days, right? And so that idea was, well, we don't need to necessarily be the builder of get the data pulled together. We need to be the builder of derived analytics, insights, and workflow products that informs, but is not like core to. So we actually went out to the market and like tried to buy the data, thinking again, that's not the strategic differentiator for us. The strategic differentiator was going to be what we did on top of a data asset. And it turned out there was no one out there that was doing it at a cost affordable, like at scale with a cleanliness level and quality level that we wanted to be able to do the job we wanted to do. My co-founder and I looked at each other at that point and said, well, hey, maybe we're thinking about this whole thing wrong. Maybe the idea of go find a vendor, buy this stuff, and then do a bunch of derived analytics and sort of SaaS is not the business that's there in the market. The business that's there in the market is doing the ingestion and collection of the data better, faster, cheaper than is being done today. And we made that pivot very early in the days of price transparency. And it was fortuitous. We're over 200 customers. We're our ARR approaching 5 million, which is pretty exciting. And so, I think if we'd have just built another SaaS platform or tool to help somebody do a job, I don't think we would have gotten the rapid growth and sort of the focused traction that we got, because we recognized that this problem was worth building for, right?
You said that nobody was gathering that data at the level of cleanliness that you guys needed, that had, I guess, one immediate like counter question or counter argument is like, did it matter at that point? It clearly has. It, like, now that we're however many years into Serif Health, it clearly has. But like up until that point, it's almost like people didn't know what they didn't have in some ways, right? So like, how do you position that, and when you're going to market and like selling this cleaner data, like people are like, why do I care?
Right. Well, and actually, it's funny. I don't even think I would have recognized this if I, as an engineering sort of builder type, hadn't gotten my hands dirty in those very earliest days, pulled in a couple dozen of these files myself, seen like how messy it was, and then done the cleaning and been like, okay, this is what we could work with. And then I went out to the market and was like, can I get something from the market that looks like this? And I got wildly different answers from everybody out there. So that was how we knew that there was a gap in expectations versus fulfillment, right? I think your question was, did it matter on the basis that people didn't know what they didn't have? It was actually the case that this entire data set had only just come out in 2022.
Okay.
So nobody knew what was in the data at all. And our very first year in business, after we launched our product, I would say the majority of our inbound customers came to us saying, trying to answer this question, I don't even know what this data looks like. Is this a fit? Like, it was just open-ended. You almost were like pitching, like, here's why this would solve your question. Here's what it looks like. We were teaching the customers essentially what we even did and what this data looked like for most of that year. Yeah. You fast forward to today, almost every customer knows what the data has in it. Almost every customer knows what is bad about that. And then the differentiation conversation comes in of, we know about that. We've already fixed that. We know that you're going to try and use it for this, which means you're going to need this join table or this enrichment. And guess what? We already provide that. So like for us, it's been a little bit of by having so many conversations with so many people trying to get things done, we've been able to recognize here's what the data should be for its most ideal form. And that actually informs our product roadmap. That's what we're building day in and day out at the company is how do we keep staying one step ahead of market expectations, not even competitors, right? Because like I like to think that in a lot of ways we try and stay on the forefront. We're not trying to just fill competitive checkboxes. We're trying to actually answer people's pain points, right? and solve those. So
That's interesting because I guess like in the early days when people didn't know what the data entailed, you almost were figuring out how to help people make that buy decision by listening to their questions, cleaning your data to do that.
yes,
Versus today, it's like you kind of know the questions. There's a pattern that involves, and you kind of have built a product that it's like a no-brainer buy instead of cleaning the data yourself.
Exactly. So early days, it's design partnership, right? We're going to build this, and we're committing engineering resources. You know, we were venture capital backed. We'd raised money. We were hiring a team. We knew we were going to allocate that team of what felt like custom requests, but we generally try and follow the like, can we find 3 examples of common patterns? If we can, okay, we'll build it as a feature. If not, we'll treat it as a custom request, and maybe we'll do it as a little more of like a services-based contract. Or we'll actually turn that around and say, maybe we could let you do some of this work yourself. Like we'll give you an intermediate state of the data, or we'll buy something, right? We'll buy a vendor that does know how to do what you're asking. It's not core to us. We're gonna like reuse it outside of this engagement. So, you know, here you go. Those are all different things that we've done throughout the course of the company. Whereas today we are very much, our theme for this year is finding those efficiencies. It's figuring out how to create off-the-shelf SKUs that serve the most folks, so that we don't have to have customization conversations with every client. Everybody wants custom, but the reality is like most people don't actually want to pay for custom engineering and development. So you know, if you want cost efficiency, then we do have to have an off-the-shelf offering that also meets the most people's needs and is market competitive. So yeah, we're in that like phase of maturity where we're trying to establish a differentiation, but also a cost-effective like sort of positioning of our product line.
Got it. Okay, so that's interesting. So like you feel like up until today, you've built a lot of things that probably serve most of these people's questions simply because you were getting these requests and building like what you felt almost like custom software. But now you're at a point where you can actually package it up nicely because you know what the questions that people are asking for are, and just say, here you go, give me your credit card. Oh, maybe at your price is, you know, a little bit more than a credit card, but you know.
And it might get there though, right? Like I think that's the thing. We're going from this was a niche new industry, nobody knew it was in the data, nobody knew how valuable it was going to be, to a rapid phase. Like a lot of folks realized this was hugely valuable, so we had so much demand we could barely keep up with it. To now you are seeing a little of like there's been a lot of entrants to the market. There's a lot more competitiveness for any given conversation. People are kind of price shopping and, you know, trying to say, well, this is 3,000 and you're 5,000. Why pay that extra like couple grand? And so the justify your existence conversation comes up a lot more than the teach me how to fish conversation that we started. And that all happened in 4 years. So, you know, what's the next phase of this going to look like? You know, I think history is going to repeat itself on new price transparency data assets. We're going to play the same game out on pharma and on drugs when that data eventually hits the market. But the broad, how are folks using price transparency data in the market today is going to go through an evolutionary shift where Serif Health originally started from, where you're going to have to be providing some sort of up-level answers to folks. And you're going to have to give them a tool that's a more like broad pressing workflow problem for them than just give them data. Because a lot of times when you give them a pile of data to work with, they feel like you just gave them another job to do. You didn't actually answer the question. And so see the core of our business needing to get there this year. And I don't think that's a secret to anybody that that's how, you know, data businesses evolve as information comes out into the market. So.
I mean, have you guys, the first thing I'm thinking about is like, Serif GPT, ask Serif a question, and it's, oh yes, the price of whatever should be this.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. No, that's probably the number one thing we get in from venture capitalists. That we get asked that a lot. How are you incorporating it?
How are you using AI?
Yeah, that's right. I hear that every week. I actually think our customers fall into a really interesting place there, where at a surface level, that's a cool party trick. But a lot of these people are CFOs or they're heads of contracting, where they're going to have to go into a negotiation with an Aetna or a United or a Cigna, or they're going to have to be accountable to the government to explain their methodology behind network design and network bring up. And when you have that kind of, okay, I'll trust you guys to like chew my food for me a little bit, but I need to go double click and make sure the analysis is correct. I'm pretty wary as a CTO of allowing the sort of like generative model to assert too strongly the right answers to things. And I think you've probably had many people talk to you on this podcast about leveraging AI in a world where you can ask ChatGPT the same thing 3 times in a row and get 3 wildly different answers. When you're selling in the data business, you're selling effectively trust and competence. And the second that you start vending stuff like that to them, or they double check the answers and get sort of like shitty facts back, that you will rapidly destroy your brand integrity. So we're already using it, and actually we did a clever hack on this. And kudos to Kevin from our dev team on this. We use ChatGPT to roll up and present some like BI style analytics graphs really rapidly without ever telling anybody that, hey, we've calculated the market P50, right? Some procedure, and you should go out and negotiate a contract based on that information. So it's like, let's use it to get the fun party tricks done for people that otherwise would have been an annoying Excel pivot table breakout, ad chart, like blah, blah, blah. So that saves them some time without presenting to, I'm a sage that knows all the right answers, and you should try for your negotiation. So
I was gonna say, this is how the AI oats
that's right. It's like, manipulate markets.
Connect them into the health system. We're done.
Oh boy.
Well, I do want to bring it back a little bit to the earlier conversation around One Medical EHR system. And I know your hands were tied in terms of like you had to build. But if you were sitting in that seat at the genesis of One Medical, how would you have thought about it, having had, this history with the EHR system?
Yeah, honestly, if I were in the shoes of those early days folks, I do not think I would build an EHR. And even my co-founder, when we were setting up Serif Health, we talked about my experience. Like, I led a team that built an EHR. Like, what better credibility do I need as a founder to say, hey, give me some money, I could go do this. I could do this better, than it's been done before. I'd actually point out Jonathan Bush of the Bush family, who's the founder of Zeus Health, essentially did this, right? He went out to the markets. He said, I'm going to build a better Epic, and it's going to be modular, and it's not going to scalp everybody on pricing, and you're going to stitch together just the pieces you want, and then you could come in and compose the section that is your competitive differentiator, right? This is the best conceptual model that I could think of in this whole build versus buy trade-off. It's a fascinating case study. And to my knowledge, Zeus Health is not doing well. They are not successful at achieving that mission because it is so incredibly complicated to build a full stack EHR. One Medical had spent 8 years on it by the time I joined, and has probably continued to spend years and countless man years and woman years of work, just in terms of the engineering cost overall. So when I look at all of that and I'm like, what do you get out of it? Unless they really did execute on that strategy, right? And they were dead set on executing on that strategy of being a licensing EHR model. You didn't actually solve the problem you were trying to solve when you made the build decision. You didn't hit that other strategic goal, which in my view is pretty mission critical. I would, if I did it all over again, I would buy that and focus on care delivery and differentiation of experience in care more than the tools, right?
Interesting.
The false assumption that you're going to get that out of the OS of like the daily interaction for the provider, I think, today can be superseded by AI dictation, right? You can take a different hack to avoid the data entry burnout problem, put that on top of an existing EHR that you've bought, and now you have an efficient model that gets rid of the pain points, but still keeps the like logistical requirements and lets somebody else do the annoying, painful work. You can get back to focusing on care delivery. So again, you see, I think you've got to pick your poison and say, what am I really differentiating on? And again, I think I said this several times throughout this podcast, right? As long as what you are building is the thing that you are committing to a differentiated moat and a strategy around, you are aligning your strategic success with what you're choosing to do in your tactical day-to-day and like your overall cost of ownership, right? If you say you're going to do it and then you don't get there, that's a big problem, as shown by the One Medical situation. Or if you buy something, this is the counter of it. If you bought something that is critically strategically differentiated for yourself, you're going to have a heck of a time unwinding that and then vertically integrating and cleaning that up. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I feel like a couple thoughts based on what you just said, right? Like one, on the Zeus examples, like practices and doctors and hospital systems, they maybe don't want the decision of which pieces I need to compose together. That's a lot of mental effort to figure it out. They're just like, we'll buy Epic. Epic has become kind of like the established system for our medical system in the United States. And then also, it feels like once there is an established incumbent, it takes a little bit of hubris to say I'm going to tackle that vertical, but maybe there's a faster way to profitability by leveraging what they build and taking that and moving it forward to a place that they're not going, or maybe it would just take too long to go. And then, as an individual, as a founder, maybe you get acquired by them, or you then start poking at the bear once you've established this other market and just moving into their territory.
Well, and I think in terms of, there's, as a founder now with price discovery, it's interesting. It's a really tricky science, right? Well, how do you price something, especially in a market where there aren't incumbent competitors, prices aren't well known? What's fascinating is I think most software vendors and software companies over time, their pricing model evolves to represent the replacement value of the build versus buy trade-off decision, right? Isn't that fascinating? Yeah. And so that pricing, because a lot of folks are in this exact, I know what it would, I project what I think it would cost me, as long as this number is lower than that, and the downside risk protection, right, accrues to me, because I can always ask the vendor to solve problems or put an SLA contract term in that puts them on the penalty, and I don't have to fight that fire, right? I do feel like pricing all other things equal is going to be at or lower than the ownership cost here. And so that's why I said, if you are going to say you're going to solve a problem, and that's going to be core to your strategy and you're going to differentiate on that, I would hope that you as a founder are picking those things that you love to do and are excited to own for the next decade. Yeah. Because, right, that's your fire. That's the grunge work you're going to do. That's a fire you're going to fight. And that's your downside risk. And so you have to be able to do that better, faster, cheaper. You're committed to it. And so I kind of like to think of that. And so whenever I'm saying we're just going to buy this, that's simpler, that's easier for us. That's because I'm actually excited about the focus that gives me on this space and the allowance to say this vendor is the accountable party here. And if something goes wrong, I can pick up the phone, call them and say, hey, we're paying you. You need to get that fixed on your side. And I'm glad I don't have to own it, right? So.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it gives you a level of focus, right?
Exactly.
Enjoy.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, just kind of to wrap up today's conversation, we always have two fun questions for our guests at the end. The first one is, tell the audience, myself, something that you're excited about that you're working on, whether personally or professionally. Yeah, so if you can share a little tidbit about yourself or your work that you want to share with this nationally syndicated podcast.
Well, but, my passion project, as you know, Mang-Git, is I have a bigger family. I have 5 kids. And so my wife and I think that is our labor of love outside of work. So every day there's something going on. This past weekend, it was soccer tournaments, my daughter's going through first communion. So I like to think of my life as sort of the work track, and then outside of that, it's the dad track. And growing a big family and helping those people become the best people they can be, that's my big commitment there. So very passionate about that and very excited about that because every day, every week, every year is a different challenge on that aspect.
Taking all of those engineering management skills and now managing 5 direct reports is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so poorly. I think my wife has sometimes commented to me, it sounds like I'm more kind to my employees than I am to my own children. Maybe I could take a page out of that tactful communication book at work.
But you have to restrict the language down to that of a child and not that of a college-educated adult.
There you go. Yeah, I do.
Cool. And then the last one would be share one product that you recently purchased that you either love or would never buy again. I always, after having done about 15, 16 of these podcast episodes, nobody said anything that they wouldn't buy again because it is a nationally syndicated podcast. But because I always challenge people to do that, but totally would expect something that you purchased that you love.
Okay. I mean, most recent purchase that stands out to me, we bought a Ford Transit 350 XLT. It's one of those gigantic white vans that big families drive around. And I would have, when we got it, I think when I married my wife and we talked about a bigger family, I said, I will happily have, more than the typical average number of children, but I will never drive that oversized church bus van thing that big families have. She convinced me this past year, and we bought one. And it's funny, I actually do really enjoy it. The amount of space is just incredible. And I mean, like from a cargo capacity perspective, I don't love the suspension. It's a little bit of a hard ride, but we have so much space. The sound system in it's fantastic. The heating and cooling, like a huge, great airflow, storage. It's actually been a really big life upgrade for us. So for all those families that are like stuck in a Toyota Sienna and going, oh my gosh, my kids keep fighting, I can't fit the extra stroller in the back. How are we going to go camping in this thing with all the kids? The transit van is the answer. And it's actually a pretty good purchase. So I would do it again.
Oh, okay. The transit van. Buy the big white van, everybody. That's
right.
What Matt's
The big white transit van. Yes.
That's awesome. I remember you telling me about this a couple months back, and when I got the text, I thought you were seriously joking.
Because I think I told you years ago, my limit's the transit van. I was like, that's a hard line in the sand here. A lot of other people's line in the sand is 2 kids with 3 kids. Mine was just the van. I didn't want to drive.
What happens beyond the van, though? That's my question. Does it?
I can see 12 Mang-Git, so and everything's game at this point. We'll see.
It's awesome. Well, thank you, Matt. It's always just so much fun and awesome to catch up with you.
Yeah,
I'm sure there'll
buddy.
be a lot more conversation that we're not going to record, for us to catch up. But really happy that you got to, you joined me on the show, and I'm sure the audience will really love to hear your story.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate everything you're building at Anvil. And Mang-Git, I can't wait to see you in San Francisco. I will actually be making a trip out there in the next few months. So
shoot me a text. You know where I live, so.
I do.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for listening. If you found this show valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or here on YouTube. We'd love if you could leave us a rating and/or a review, as that helps others find this podcast. See you next time.